When I was a kid, I was captivated by ancient books, those forgotten tomes that had slipped through history's grasp, their stories left unread for centuries. To me, they were relics of lost lives, echoes from distant worlds. Unfortunately, my hometown was quiet and uneventful, offering little to stoke my curiosity. But hidden down a narrow side street in the older part of town was a small, cluttered antique shop called Thompson's Treasures. The shop was dimly lit and thick with dust, crammed with relics that seemed to hum with untold stories. It became my refuge. The owner, Mr. Thompson, was a rugged man in his 60s, always wearing a patched cardigan with worn elbows. His face was lined with deep wrinkles, but his eyes sparkled with the sharp awareness of someone who knew far more than he let on. History isn't just kings and dates, he once told me, handing me a juice box as I sat cross-legged on the creaky wooden floor. It's the lives hidden in the margins, the stories no one bothered to remember. Mr. Thompson loved sharing the histories behind his items. After school, I'd ride my bike straight to the shop and spend hours listening to his tales. I thought I'd seen everything the store had to offer, until one day, I overheard him mentioning something called the back room to a customer. "Stay out of there," he warned firmly when I asked about it. "That place isn't for young eyes. Some things are best left alone." Naturally, that only fueled my curiosity. One rainy afternoon, while Mr. Thompson was distracted by a talkative customer, I saw my chance. My heart pounded as I slipped past the dusty curtain that separated the main shop from the forbidden back room. The air inside was thick with the smell of old wood and mildew. Stacks of boxes teetered precariously, cobwebs veiling forgotten relics. At first glance, it looked like more of the same old trinkets gathering dust. But then my eyes locked onto a large book partially hidden beneath a pile of moth-eaten fabric. Its leather cover was cracked and weathered, as though it had survived countless years. My 12-year-old hands trembled as I brushed away the dust. The spine was weak, and the pages were yellowed and curling at the edges. Strange symbols looped and twisted across the parchment, incomprehensible to me at the time. "What do you think you're doing?" Mr. Thompson's booming voice shattered the silence, making me drop the book in panic. He stormed in, his face flushed with anger. "I told you to stay out of here. I just wanted to see," I stammered. "You had no right to touch that." His hands quivered as he gently scooped up the book, holding it as though it might crumble in his grasp. "Get out. And don't ever go snooping where you don't belong." I didn't argue. I bolted, his angry muttering trailing behind me. That day haunted me. My fascination with ancient texts only grew stronger. I eventually pursued archaeology and specialized in medieval manuscripts. By the time I was working on my master's degree, I could read Middle English fluently. But one thing still lingered in the back of my mind: the mysterious book from Thompson's shop. For my thesis, I needed an original medieval manuscript to translate and analyze. The memory of that forbidden text surfaced, stronger than ever. Nearly a decade had passed when I returned to my hometown. Thompson's Treasures was still there, though the paint on the sign had faded, and the windows were more clouded than I remembered. Mr. Thompson himself looked frilier, his steps slower, his face more hollow. "Back again, huh?" he said as I stepped inside, the bell above the door jingling softly. "Didn't think I'd see you around these parts anymore." "I'm finishing my degree," I explained. "Thought I'd stop by for old time's sake." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Not much has changed here." We made small talk while I subtly guided him toward the front of the shop. "Still got that old globe?" I asked, gesturing toward a dusty corner. As he shuffled off to retrieve it, I slipped through the curtain into the back room. The layout hadn't changed. My heart pounded as I scanned the clutter, and there it was, the book, still resting in the same spot. It felt heavier than I remembered, its leather cover rough and cold beneath my fingers. Without hesitation, I slid it into my bag and hurried back out. "Thanks for the chat, Mr. Thompson," I called, keeping my voice steady. "I'll stop by again soon." He muttered, his sharp eyes narrowing. That night, in the dim light of my dorm room, I finally opened the book. Its brittle pages crackled as I turned them, the faded ink still legible. The strange text wasn't meaningless scribbles. It was Middle English. Here's what it said. "I write these words as autumn leaves drift gently from the trees, their gold and crimson shades filling the air with the quiet promise of winter's chill. The world feels calm, as it often does this time of year, when the harvest is stored and the granaries stand full. Our kingdom prospers under King Edward III's reign. Though I've never seen him in person, his name is spoken with reverence throughout the land. They say his court is a place of unmatched splendor, where knights in shining armor kneel before him, and poets weave verses in grand, gilded halls. Even here, in our small village of Ainsworth, we feel the blessings of his rule. Taxes are fair, roads are safe, and our market buzzes with merchants from faraway places. Ainsworth is a modest village, a cluster of cottages nestled in a valley surrounded by rolling hills. But it is home. The barley fields are plentiful, and the river runs clear and cold. The villagers are like family, always ready to lend a hand or share a meal when times are tough. Our family cottage is small but sturdy, with a thatched roof and a garden my mother lovingly tends. She swears the herbs she grows, thyme, lavender, and rosemary, ward off illness. My father is a carpenter, his hands hardened by years of shaping wood into tools and wagons. He is a man of few words but steady and dependable, like the oak beams that support our home. Then there's my sister, Cecily, a lively 12-year-old whirlwind. She's always running barefoot through the village or climbing trees with the other children, her laughter ringing through the air. My days are filled with work and joy. I rise with the sun to tend the sheep and gather firewood. But by midday, I'm free to join my friends. There's Henry, the baker's son, whose pockets are always stuffed with pilfered pastries, and Thomas, who dreams of becoming a knight, though his sword is just a stick he found in the woods. We spend afternoons exploring the hills, racing through meadows, and skipping stones across the river. On Sundays, we gather in the village square to hear traveling minstrels sing of valor and romance. But the brightest part of my life is Eleanor. She's the miller's daughter, with hair like ripe wheat and eyes as green as spring meadows. We've known each other since childhood, and it's always been understood that we would marry someday. Eleanor's laugh bubbles up like the river after a storm, and when she looks at me, the rest of the world fades away. We walk together for hours, dreaming of our future, a cottage of our own with a garden for her and a workshop for me. "You'll be the finest carpenter in the village," she said just yesterday, her cheeks pink from the chilly air. "And I'll bake bread fit for the king himself. Only if the king has teeth like a goat," I teased, earning a playful slap on the arm. The future seems as bright as the harvest moon. The village hums with preparations for the winter festival, a time of feasting, dancing, and joy. The scent of roasting chestnuts and spiced cider fills the air, and the church bells ring with festive cheer. The monks from the abbey have brought news of the king's latest victory in France. The villagers cheer at the tales of our army's triumph, and even the priest smiles as he offers his blessings. I often think these are the best days of my life. There is no fear here, no dark cloud hanging over us. We work hard, laugh even harder, and dream of all that lies ahead. I am 16 now, standing on the edge of manhood. My father says I'll soon take over the workshop, and Eleanor's father has already begun crafting furniture for our future home. It feels as though everything is falling perfectly into place, as though nothing could ever disturb the peace and happiness we've come to cherish. The air grows colder with each passing day, but life in Ainsworth carries on as it always has. The harvest is gathered, fires crackle in the hearths, and homes glow with the warmth of winter preparations. The only hint of trouble comes from distant whispers of a spreading sickness. Henry was the first to mention it after returning from the market in the neighboring village. They say there's a sickness going around, he told me as we sat by the river. Comes with the rats. People get sick, break out in boils, and die within days. Rats. We've always had them in our fields and barns, scurrying in the shadows and gnawing at the grain. What could be different now? Just stories, Thomas scoffed, running his stick sword across a rock as if sharpening it. Frightened people make up tales to pass the time. I nodded in agreement. What illness could ever reach our secluded valley? We were safe here, tucked away from the troubles of the outside world. With that comforting thought, I pushed the worry aside, turning my attention back to my family and to Eleanor. It started with old widow Hargrove. She had always been frail, her face a web of deep wrinkles, her back bent like an ancient, twisted branch. When she fell ill, no one thought much of it. Winter takes the old, my father often said. But then the boils came, dark and swollen, festering beneath her skin until they burst, oozing foul-smelling pus. Her cough turned thick and wet, and within 3 days she was gone. The village buried her quietly, and life carried on. Then it struck the miller's boy and his young bride. They had been married less than 3 months, their laughter still fresh in the village square. Eleanor and I had danced at their wedding. Now they lay side by side in their cottage, their bodies twisted in agony, their faces grotesquely distorted by the blackened swellings. The priest offered last rites, his voice trembling with fear. Deus nos punire peccatus nostris. God is punishing us for our sins, he warned, urging the villagers to gather in the church and repent. I began to notice the rats everywhere. They seemed bolder now, scurrying through the streets even in broad daylight, their red eyes glowing like burning coals. Eleanor mentioned seeing them in the mill, gnawing through sacks of grain. Don't touch them, my father warned grimly. They carry filth. But by then it was already too late. The Thompsons, our neighbors, were the next to fall. Their youngest daughter staggered into the street, her tiny hands clutching the hem of my tunic as she pleaded for help. They're burning, she sobbed, her voice rough with desperation. I forced myself to step inside their cottage, and instantly wished I hadn't. The stench was overwhelming, a nauseating blend of sweat, blood, and rot. Mr. Thompson writhed on the floor, his body convulsing in violent spasms. His wife sat slumped in a wooden chair, her face buried in trembling hands. Black, festering sores covered her arms, her cracked skin weeping dark, putrid fluid. I write this with trembling hands. My mother and Cecily have fallen ill. It started with a fever, their faces flushed and their bodies burning with heat. Then came the boils, horrid, blackened lumps erupting across their skin like a cruel harvest. Cecily weeps softly now, her voice barely more than a fragile whisper, while my mother drifts into delirium, calling out to my father and pleading with God. The coughing is the worst of it. Deep, ragged, and relentless. It shakes their frail bodies as though determined to break them apart. Dark, sticky blood seeps from their cracked lips with every racking breath. I sit at their sides, clutching their hands, whispering desperate prayers for mercy. But in my heart, I know the grim truth. The plague has come to Ainsworth, and it will not leave until it has claimed us all. The church bells toll endlessly, calling the villagers to repentance. Father Edmund stands at the altar, his once pristine robes now stained with the blood of the dying, his voice raw with desperation as he implores us to seek God's mercy. Veni ad Deum, quia nos punient peccata nostra, come to God, for he punishes us for our sins. He cries, his words trembling with despair. The church is packed, the air thick with the stench of unwashed bodies and suffocating fear. People wail and scream, their cries reverberating off the cold stone walls. Some tear at their clothes, others lash themselves with whips, their backs crisscrossed with bleeding wounds. They believe their suffering might appease God, might somehow halt the plague's relentless march. But the plague does not heed prayers. The streets are eerily silent now, broken only by the anguished cries of the dying and the soft, persistent scurrying of rats. Doors remain barred, windows shuttered tight. No one ventures outside unless it is to carry another lifeless body to the ever-growing mass grave at the edge of the village. Eleanor's father fell ill yesterday. She stays at his side, refusing to leave despite the danger. I ache to see her, to hold her, but I cannot. My father forbids it, and deep down I know he is right. How did it come to this? How did our thriving kingdom, our peaceful village, fall into such despair? I fear it is only a matter of time before the plague consumes us all. Strange men now roam the village, draped in long, somber robes, their faces concealed behind eerie bird-like masks. The masks are fashioned from dark leather, their curved beaks stuffed with bundles of herbs and fragrant spices, cloves, cinnamon, and rosemary. Yet beneath the pungent aroma lies something far more sinister, a faint but unmistakable scent of decay, as though the earth itself is rotting beneath our feet. They call themselves doctors, but I do not trust them. No, I am certain they are not healers at all. Yesterday, I saw one of them near the town square. His mask was caked with dust, his eyes hidden behind dark, round lenses. He held a long wooden staff in his gloved hand, and when an old man, stooped with fever, staggered toward him, the doctor struck him hard across the back. The old man cried out in pain, but the doctor showed no mercy. He simply moved on, indifferent, leaving the man crumpled and humiliated in the dirt. Still, people flock to them. Why? I cannot understand it. Perhaps they believe these bird-faced figures hold some secret cure, some hidden remedy beneath their grotesque masks. But they bring no potions, no healing salves, no treatments. They bring only fear. They march through our streets like untouchable gods, cloaked in symbols of death. Yet I have never seen them heal a single soul. Their sticks strike the ground with harsh authority as they shout commands in Latin that few can comprehend. Stay back, filthy wretches, they bellow, driving away the desperate and the dying. Last week, I watched as one of them entered the home of a woman I once knew. She had been consumed by the plague, her skin blackened and swollen. He stepped through her door, disappearing into the dimness of her house. When he emerged, he did not glance back, not even once. He did not check if she still drew breath. With a cold detachment, he gave her house a single cursory look and walked away in silence. Her lifeless body remained there for days before the village finally bothered to bury her. The villagers are desperate, just as we all are. They have no choice but to cling to the belief that these masked men hold the answers. Some say the doctors bring with them the air of life, though no one seems to know what that truly means. To me, it sounds like a cruel lie. I can't shake the suspicion that these figures are spreading the very plague they claim to cure. With every step they take, their poisons and perfumed herbs seem to drift on the wind, carrying death in their wake. Today, Thomas shared a rumor he overheard. Father Edmund speaking in hushed, anxious tones with another priest. They suspect the doctors are part of a dark conspiracy, hired by the king himself to cleanse the kingdom. They believe these men were sent not to heal, but to control, to break the people through fear and suffering. I cannot understand why the king would allow such monsters into our homes, into our very streets. The sickness tightens its grip on the village with each passing day, yet we are still commanded to trust these so-called doctors. But I cannot trust them. How could I? This morning, I saw one of the masked doctors standing in front of our house. My father stood at the door, arms crossed, watching warily as the figure approached up the dirt lane. The doctor was tall, his black mask sharp and menacing, like something pulled from a dark nightmare. His eyes, hidden behind gleaming, soulless lenses, revealed nothing. He stopped at the edge of our yard and slowly raised his wooden staff, but my father stepped forward, his voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. "You will not come near us," my father commanded. The doctor said nothing. With swift, brutal force, he swung his staff and struck my father's leg, sending him crashing to the ground. I darted toward him, but the doctor lifted his staff again, a silent threat glinting in his unreadable gaze. Then, without a word, he turned and strode away, as though we were no more than insects crushed beneath his heel. I stayed by my father's side, helping him to his feet, though I could see the fear etched deep in his eyes. He knows, just as I do, that something is terribly, horribly wrong. Now, as I write this, I cannot shake the feeling that these doctors have brought more than just sickness to our village. They bring fear. They sow distrust. I am convinced they are not merely symbols of the plague. They are its carriers. If they are truly the cause, I do not know how we can stop them. No one dares defy them. They hold power, moving through the streets like specters beyond reach. And if the king has sent them, perhaps he knows far more about their dark purpose than we ever could. I do not know how much longer I can watch my village crumble into ruin. The plague spreads like wildfire, and these doctors move among us, untouched, leaving more than just death in their wake. They leave despair. God help us. I awoke this morning to an unsettling silence, an oppressive stillness that clung to the air like the creeping fog seeping through the cracks in the window. Rising from my bed, I felt dread pressing down on me like a heavy cloak. The cold of the room mirrored the hollow ache in my chest. My family, once so full of life, now lay quiet and still. I needed water. I had to escape the suffocating confines of the house, even if only for a moment. Perhaps the fresh air would clear my mind. Let me forget the sickness that had consumed my home, my village, my world. I was gone only a short while, but when I returned, everything had changed. The front door stood slightly ajar. As I stepped inside, a nauseating stench hit me, the foul, unmistakable smell of decay, of death. My stomach twisted with dread. I moved cautiously into the kitchen and froze. A doctor, one of those cursed men in the bird masks, stood in the center of the room, hunched over the table. My breath caught as I realized what he was doing. Rats, dozens of them scurried across the floor, driven by his gloved hands. He was releasing them, setting them loose inside my home. "Why?" I choked out, my voice breaking. The doctor turned slowly, as if surprised by my presence. Without a word, he reached for his wooden staff and swung it with brutal force against my chest. The blow sent me sprawling backward. "Deus diabolitus est," he muttered coldly. His voice was devoid of emotion, hollow and merciless. I struggled to rise, pain stabbing through my ribs, blood pooling in my mouth. I barely had time to raise my hands in defense before he struck me again. When he finally left, I lay bleeding on the cold floor. But the rats, they were already at work. The doctor, or whatever inhuman thing he truly was, had sealed our fate. I dragged myself through the house, desperate to reach my family, but I was too late. My mother, father, and sister lay still in their beds, their faces marred by mottled boils and dark, festering patches. Blood spilled from their mouths in ghastly torrents, their bodies convulsing in twisted agony. I heard the gurgling, choking sounds as life slipped from them. My sister's small frame was racked with violent coughs, her face twisted in anguish, dark blood splattering her pale skin. I couldn't save them. I couldn't even touch them without recoiling in horror. Their vacant, glassy eyes stared lifelessly, frozen in eternal suffering. My screams for help went unanswered. Then I heard it, the voice I longed for amidst the nightmare. Her voice, my love. She appeared in the doorway, her hand trembling as she reached for mine. Her breath came in ragged gasps, and she coughed violently, blood staining the cloth pressed to her lips. But there was still fire in her eyes. "We need to leave," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I couldn't think, I couldn't breathe. I wanted to save her, to protect her. But the sickness had already taken root, winding its way through her veins, tightening its grip on her lungs. Without thinking, we fled. We ran as far as we could, but it didn't matter. The village was already falling, consumed by the plague that had stolen my family, my friends, my world. We found shelter in a small, crumbling house at the edge of the village. Its walls were weak, its roof sagging, but it was a place to hide, a fragile refuge. Her coughs worsened, sharp and wet. Blood stained the rag she held to her lips. I stayed by her side, holding her hand, feeling the weakening pulse beneath her trembling fingers. I felt it too, the burning fever, the sharp, stabbing pain in my chest. The plague had come for us both. I can't bear it any longer. This world is gone, swallowed by darkness and despair. I write these final words with the last strength left in my broken body, cursing anyone who dares read them. May the plague find you. May it follow you, haunt you, consume your family, your lover, your village, just as it consumed mine. I am nothing now. Soon I will be forgotten, but you will carry this curse. If there is any justice left in this forsaken world, you will meet the same fate that has claimed me. Today I will die, and with me the last spark of hope will vanish. May God have mercy on my soul. January 22nd. I close my eyes now, and all I hear is the rasp of her breath. And then silence. The diary's final pages were stained with blood. The ink had bled and smeared, the letters twisted into an unreadable mess. But it didn't matter. The boy had already sealed his fate, and now perhaps mine as well.